Hey there! Look, so if you're simply looking for a game's profit number and not interested in how we got to that margin, I won't force you to watch the video. The profit for a $60 game per disc is anything ranging from $0 to maybe about $5. The upper limit is quite rare and highly unlikely in truth. And I know games now cost $70, not $60. But there's no difference in terms of profit, that's merely to compensate for the hyperinflated development costs. So that's your answer. But if you're interested in knowing how we got to that number, and how the $60 is divided among retailers, developers, and publishers, then this is for you. Okay, so here's one thing we need to establish first. Only the actual publishers know how much profit they make per each game disc. All information presented here are from what industry insiders have shared based on direct experience. We'll use the $60 tag instead of the new $70 price, as the additional $10 is merely for the inflated development costs. Before analyzing, we'll separate video games into two cases, since their revenues are drastically different. Case A, physical game sales, and Case B, digital sales. Starting off with physical game sales. The $60 is divided into scrums for the retailer, distributor, and the publisher. To start off at the top of the pyramid, we have retailers or wholesalers buying the game from publishers. This purchase is made in what's known as a sheet price or price sheet. The sheet price is a fixed dollar value charged for any particular product. What makes this sheet price interesting is the fact that all publishers have almost identical sheet prices for their games, barring some very marginal changes. For example, EA might sell FIFA for a sheet price of $48, or Bethesda could make a wholesale for Fallout for $48.50, or in the extreme sense, say Take-Two could sell a Grand Theft Auto game for $49. But in general scope, the margin among these games is quite small. AAA games barely go below the $48 mark, while still having a max price of $49.50. After retailers stock video games using this sheet price, we can estimate their profits. A retailer barely makes more than $12 profits for games, and that's in the most favorable circumstances. Some sources suggest they could get 30 to 35% of the profit, but that's quite an overestimation. That equates to $18 to $21 of profit. Few others also argue that retailers get $15 for most AAA titles. That doesn't seem to be likely either though, cause that would be a very big gain for a product that had a fortune spent on it by those who made it. But of course, there are special scenarios to consider. Publishers may give special offers such as marketing discounts. Ubisoft, for example, would extend a 5% discount to orders placed on a new release title within the first 30 days. They might also kick back an additional 3% of total purchases as marketing dollars to encourage retailers to buy their games, and other allowances might also follow. That would knock the price down by a further $5 or so. The profit of retailers will be capped off between $10 to $12, assuming they get their games from publishers directly. But if they buy it from distributors, they'll pay even more. About $52 or above is estimated for a single game disc. So to conclude, retailers' profit range from a very generous $12 if they buy it directly from publishers, and $6 or even lower if they buy it from wholesale distributors. Now we get to the second tier of the pyramid, the publisher. We've estimated before that publishers sell their games at a constant sheet price of roughly $48. But depending on whether or not they discount their games, that sheet price could go down as little as $43 per title. Add this all up and the publisher could be left with $43 up to $48. That's not the end of the story though. This rabbit hole extends into a deep abyss. To pin a crucial note here, there is no single person on earth that can accurately know how the money is distributed within the publisher, unless they themselves worked within that company. Luckily, some insiders have shared their experiences and how that budgeting works. Here's how one insider described the dissection of the budget. Alex Farm, an insider with credits on business plannings of Sonic Origins and Lost Judgment, has revealed how the remaining dollars are divided among the lion's share. First off, there's the video game platform owners such as Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. These guys aren't going to let you sell your games on their console without getting a piece of the pie. According to Alex Farm and other experts, platform owners make about $7 for each copy sold. That means from the $43 to $48 earned, the publisher remains with a $36 to $41. Then there's the cost of making, packing, and shipping game discs to stores, which adds another $4 to the mix. Remaining money flickers around $32 to $37. Now, there is one final caveat the publisher takes before having complete ownership of the money. Not all of their games end up selling, meaning there will be thousands of unsold disc copies in their inventories. Whichever solution publishers choose, be it simply destroying the discs or reusing them in different forms, it adds another cost of $7 per game disc. So the final money the publisher gets will be around $25 to $30. Alex Farm's exact estimation was $27 per disc, but we're making compromises in order to get a very accurate range, and so far it's all been fairly close. Now comes the tricky part. Even after all this journey, it doesn't mean a publisher actually makes a profit from the remaining amount. In reality, things are looking far from being profitable. Well, at least not yet. The $25 to $30 mark is the revenue they generate per game. The profit has lots of further deductions made from that mark. The next phase leads us to the direct expenditures the actual game development endures. Now, there are three main costs for that. First, licensing and royalty costs. Game developers get licenses for the IPs they use, like Marvel or DC games, or in sports, they license titles like EA's Madden or previous FIFA series. As for racing games, do they use real cars? If so, that will require a license to use from car manufacturers like Ford or Chevrolet. Music licenses also fall under this category. Then there are the development costs. This is simply the money developers require to create the game. This will include salaries of employees and the various technological equipments they use. Pretty much straightforward. Finally, the marketing cost. This is the cost of showcasing the game to the world and making people aware of the product's existence. And ironically, marketing costs have now surpassed development costs and take the largest share in game development. You see, the major issue we face in estimating total costs is that all of these three vary enormously from one game to another, even within the same publisher. Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Phoenix Rising are both published and developed by Ubisoft. Both are AAA titles with season passes, but without a doubt, those two games have very different costs in all the three sectors we mentioned. And well, since the costs of each game are different, the biggest challenge is extracting those numbers. Luckily, various court reports and leaks have provided us with real data we can use for these estimates. So, what is left in pure net profit at the end? Maybe 10% of the 60? 20% would be an insane number, and that's though it's well below the $10 per copy mark. So, let's find out. Now time to calculate the actual profits. In general, it depends on the way you view profits to begin with. The best way to look at it is to dedicate all the money a publisher earns, the $27 mark, and completely allocate it to the development until it reaches the break-even point. The break-even point is the amount of revenue generated to cover all the costs without getting any profit. Then everything else sold after that point will be directly profitable to the publisher. We'll use the examples of the two disclosed development costs of Horizon Forbidden West and The Last of Us Part 2 during FTC Sony court battles. But we need to make some adjustments first. A. Sony owns the PlayStation platform. And since Horizon is a PlayStation exclusive, it generates $34 instead of $27 per disc as other games do, since the platform fee directly goes to Sony. B. We'll assume all sales of this game are physical and were for $60. Digital sales have different cost divisions. More on that later. C. The FTC document only disclosed the development costs, meaning the marketing costs of these games weren't included. Since marketing costs of AAA games mostly range from $50 million to about $200 million, we'll take a generous and hypothetical estimate of $60 million for both games. The Sony Court document in the FTC vs. Microsoft lawsuit disclosed this information. Horizon Forbidden West cost $212 million with 300 full-time employees, neglecting external support from other studios. The total cost of this game will be the development costs plus marketing cost, which equals to $212 million plus our hypothetical $60 million marketing budget, giving us a total of $272 million. We'll take $34 as the revenue generated per game, since Sony owns the PlayStation platform. Hence, taking this development cost, we can estimate the amount of sales it takes for Sony to break even. So, dividing $272 million with $34 million will give us the amount of sales Sony needs in order to break even and cover all their development costs. The number we get is equivalent to this, $8 million. Hence, Sony will need to sell roughly 8 million copies just to cover the total costs completely before making any profit. Sony said Horizon Forbidden West sold about 8.4 million units sold as of May 2023. Now, let's calculate the actual profit. Subtract 8.4 million from 8 million. We get the number of games that directly contribute to the profits, 400,000. Multiply 400,000 by $34. The profit made then is $13,600,000. Divide this number with the total units sold and you get the profit per disc. It roughly estimates to $1.6 profit per game disc sold. So, here's the thing. Yeah, you can only know the total profit per game disc once you establish how many units sold you have, and hence the total revenue. Let's take one more example with The Last of Us Part 2. This is how the profit margins fare, still taking the same assumptions as for Horizon Forbidden West. As of June 2022, lifetime unit sales of The Last of Us Part 2 stood at 10 million games sold, with 220 million development costs, comprising of 200 employees neglecting external support. Total cost is 220 million plus our hypothetical cost of 60 million, equating to around 280 million. Making all the computations, the break-even point becomes 8.2 million unit sales. The total profit made from this game will estimate to $600 million. Profit per disc then becomes $6. Now, this might seem like a huge profit margin, and if true, well, it is a huge profit. But in reality, the profit margin for both games might be significantly smaller, or even slightly larger. The above estimates didn't consider special offer sales that slashed the $60 mark for these games, and our marketing costs were quite generous at about $60 million. Hundreds of millions are spent on marketing alone though, and that changes everything. And this was Sony earning $34 revenue per game disc sale. Other publishers make $27 due to the deducted platform fee. The truth is, a lot of games will just flat out lose money. They won't be profitable at all. If a game sells 1 million copies and manages to get a net profit of $5 per copy, that would be an extremely huge profit, and maybe a handful of games will ever achieve it. The profit per game disc will be anywhere from $0 to an unlikely extreme high of $5. There are, of course, games that blow the number out of the park though. The Witcher 3 cost around $81 million on the cheap side of AAA games. But it made a whopping $100 million in just the first 2 weeks of its release. The game has a total lifetime sales of over 28.3 million units. It is without a doubt one of the most profitable AAA games in history. Same with GTA 5. It has about 160 million total sales on all platforms. But these are anomalies and the most successful titles in their fields. These feats can only be dreamt of by others. AAA titles need millions of disc sales just to break even. They barely scrap a few million in profit after spending hundreds of millions on the project. That's why season passes, DLCs, and microtransactions have become quite common. Publishers want safer routes to cover their costs, and these add safety nets in their circumstances of poor sale. But there is one more alternative route to generate more revenue per game. The second path we haven't explored: digital game sales. It's no doubt that publishers prefer this instead of traditional physical sales, and you'll get to see why. Cause in this scenario, there are no retailers, packaging and shipping costs. There are only the online store owners and the publishers. When you buy a game digitally, purchases are done either through third-party online game stores like Steam or Epic Games, or from first-party stores that sell their own games exclusively in the instances of EA Play or Ubisoft Store. Of course, there are stores that sell both first and third-party titles like the PS and Xbox stores. In the case of pure third-party stores like Steam, they take 30% from each game sale. And in rare cases, there are stores like Epic Games which only take 12% as they label the 30% cut unfair for developers. But such stores are extremely rare, and the 30% benchmark is common for all of them. So say you buy Dead Space on Steam for $70. Valve, owner of Steam, then gets $20 per game. Same when you buy it from the PS Store or Xbox Store. Platform owners in this case get better profits than the $7 they get from physical game sales. But when you buy Dead Space on EA Play, all the $70 goes directly to the publisher EA, since they own the online platform as well as the game itself. Using these matrices, it's safe to assume digital sales are better for publishers and platform owners in terms of profit. That's part of the reason migration has accelerated to selling video games in the digital market. The revenues are incomparable for all parties involved. From a $60 game, physical game sales generates $27 per sale for publishers and $7 for platform owners. Digital sales, however, generate $42 for publishers and $18 for the store owners. It's clear why the industry have come to favor the latter option. The margins are undoubtedly more favorable. To conclude it all, profits can go anywhere from $0 in the case of a direct loss to a very unrealistic $5 or even more dollars per game. In most cases, publishers can make mere cents below $1. And in the very hyper-successful games, maybe $2, $3, or even $4 might be possible. The price increase to $70 is merely an addition to the inflating development costs. Platform owners and retailers are still making the same profit as before. Publisher and developers are merely trying to sustain themselves of the cumbersome costs of development. The main problem with all of this is that publishers will start opting for other routes to sustain themselves, path which all of us are familiar with, but not a big fan of. Ways that have become a parasite and epidemic in the gaming industry. But that's the story for another day. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.